So, Dr. Edgar, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and just giving the readers some time. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. Well, we're here talking about your book, Created and Creating, a Biblical Theology of Culture. Maybe what would be a great idea to start off with, because culture, you discuss that even in the book, that there's so many different definitions. Maybe you could give us a working definition of culture rather than just people assuming it's talking about only art and music.
Sure, I'll try. I mean, the bigger definition of culture would be a repertoire of socially transmitted ideas about how to live and make judgments. A more narrow definition would be from the Bible, where my book is an argument that says that the creation mandate, which is sometimes called the cultural mandate, has three parts. It's a covenant blessing of God on the human race. It's the command to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, and its rule over the creation. And this three-part cultural mandate is reiterated throughout the Bible and has its culmination in the Great Commission. So you could look at it from the more anthropological point of view, which I gave, or you could look at it from the more narrowly biblical view, which involves these three aspects. So in either case, the argument of the book is that God has called us to engage in culture and to do so as a primary human calling that takes us from now to eternity.
Absolutely, that's a great definition. I'll have to say, as I started reading the book, initially you're merely laying down some of the premises from various and sundry writers, primarily secular, and I was getting a little nervous that it was going to be one of those the Bible bends to the culture, but I was pleased as I started getting through the book that I'm like, okay, this is a spot-on book, and it's a great read. So thank you for writing it.
Very well.
Perhaps with that being said, another good place to start would be to give the reader the overall premise of the book, Created and Creating.
Mm-hmm. Well, the overall premise is that God made us as His image bearers, and one of the primary purposes of humanity is to engage in what I'm calling culture in the largest sense, which, as I mentioned, includes a primary relationship to God, a secondary relationship to the rest of the world by populating it, and a third relation, which is probably in one way the most important, which is to subdue the earth. And that includes not just farming and agricultural endeavors, which it does, but it includes all of the other endeavors that we have, which includes the arts, includes politics, other institutions, education, and so on. So my argument is that that's a primary calling for the human race, and it has its ultimate fulfillment in the Great Commission.
Absolutely. So, that all being said, and hopefully as we go, you can break some of those three pieces up. But do you have a feel that we should strictly look at the Bible for our cultural influences, or that each person's culture is an important element in the relationship with God?
So what I believe is that the Bible commands us to be cultural beings, which has a two-edged aspect to it. One is to challenge the surrounding cultural norms, because we're in a fallen world, which has views of what culture is that are really not God-centered. But the second is to bring forth something that transforms the world and brings the kingdom of God forward and enables human flourishing in order to help the human race accomplish its purposes. So it's negative. It opposes trends. Do not be conformed to this world. But then it's positive, which is a building relationship, which is be transformed and bring God's commands to bear in the rough and tumble of life. So the Bible really gives us that broad approach to culture making. And I like the title that InterVarsity gave me, Created and Creating, because it says we are, first of all, creatures of God, but second, because of that, we then go and make culture. We then produce culture as a reflection of His primary calling to us as a human race.
Right. So basically, God being the creator, that makes Him the ultimate and creative. Yep. Us as His creation in His image makes us creative as well, right? So is there a line there between art and music and some of the things we define as culture in relationship to bringing that to God and being creative? He kind of wants us to be, right?
Right. So there's a line, which is that we'll always be creatures. We'll never be the creators in the ultimate sense. But as creatures, we have a responsive or reflexive or recreative role in taking the world that God has given us and shaping it to glorify Him and honor Him, which includes the arts, but it goes way beyond that. It includes science and education and families and all the wonderful aspects of being human. So the line is that we'll never become God, but we will always seek to reproduce, recreate, reenact all of the majesty of what God has called us to do.
Absolutely, it's beautiful. Nobody can beat God's creation. I find it beautiful and important that you also do bring up, science and taking care of a family, because all of those things, whether people realize it or not, also take creative solutions. So they're all being creative, but in possibly different ways than when you think an artist is creative and someone says, well, I could never do that, but they're creative every day in their life, right?
That's right. Martin Luther famously said that the work of the least householder is of more importance than all the work of monks and nuns and missionaries. What he meant by that was not to demean monks and missionaries, but he meant to say that if I'm taking care of my house and I'm a steward of what God has given me in a very humble way, that's just as noble and creative within the calling that God's addressed to me as the important priest or the missionary or the nun. I think all aspects of human life are honorable, whether or not they appear to be honorable or whether they appear to be famous or celebrity oriented, or whether they're just incredibly modest. All before God, they all matter.
Yeah, that's a beautiful process. Yeah, you have to love God for it. So back to your book though, Created and Creating. Who were some of your major influences as you wrote this book, or at least as it formed in your mind?
Yeah. Number one, I was brought to a knowledge of Christianity through a man in Switzerland, an American pastor named Francis Schaeffer, and he had this basic outlook, a worldview Christianity. Everything fell under the lordship of Christ. Number two, I guess some of the great teachers at the seminary where I operate, so Gerhardus Voss, Cornelius Van Til, Edmund Clowney, and others who taught biblical theology, that is a view that the Scripture is more than just a collection of verses. It's an unfolding mystery which is seasonal and epical, and so this cultural mandate, which began at creation, is reiterated through all the different dispensations until it comes to Christ. And then I guess number three, some of the more practical people that I've followed include Os Guinness, to whom the book is dedicated, who has an analysis of Western culture and of the place of North America that I have found extremely challenging and helpful. And then finally, people in the tradition of Kuyper, you can call them neo-Kuyperians. Abraham Kuyper, the great father of modern worldview thinking, and then so many people in his succession. So those are, I would say, those are some of the main influences. There's plenty of others, but those are the ones that really have guided me as I put all of this together.
Absolutely wonderful. Yeah, Os Guinness is a phenomenally prolific writer and great speaker, so you can't go wrong there. You know, in the book you discuss how culture, and part of what culture is, the improving of human condition, that it's frequently championed by authors, of great literature, especially I guess in centuries past, scholars and many academics in the same vein, but not always so much by the church. And as you pointed out several times in our interview, starting with Genesis, where it tells us to populate and subdue the earth, but that we're in a fallen state. So, we don't always do, I guess, our best, but we keep trying. Many of those secular thinkers, those literary writers and such, they do have redemptive points, but they still many times have conflicting philosophies with Christianity. So could you maybe elaborate a little bit on that concept and maybe cite a couple of examples if you could, and what you think is the church's and each of the believers' obligations today?
Sure. So what you want to do with every fertile thinker is to cull out the positive contributions, and then to be critical of things that are not biblical. And this would include some of the greatest thinkers in our tradition. You asked for an example. So Matthew Arnold is somebody I spent some time thinking about. He was a late 19th century Victorian British thinker. His burden was to preserve civilization and to stave off what he thought was barbarism. And so he wrote about the way that to keep barbarism at bay was through education. He was writing in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, and he was writing in a culture that he thought was threatened by the incursion of these chaotic forces. So what can we learn from him? Well, a lot about the zeal for preserving learning and high culture and education, and he was very big on literature and the arts and so forth. But at the same time, he had this view that's not biblical about how culture will sort of save us, will preserve us, will keep us from barbarism. And the Bible just doesn't talk this way about culture. Culture is a human endeavor that's important, but the only force that's going to save us from barbarism is God's grace. So you take these amazing thinkers and you learn from what they can bring us, and you eschew the part that would be humanistic or that would be self-aggrandizing. And I think almost every thinker brings a positive and a negative, and Christians following 1 Thessalonians 5 should hold on to the good, prove all things, hold on to the good, and then leave off what is dangerous or bad.
Yeah, absolutely. So correct me if I'm wrong, since you studied under Francis Schaeffer, but it reminds me of much of like what he discussed. In kind of paraphrasing, but it was kind of like even a visual artist, for instance, might paint, and that they're secular as well, might paint a somewhat dark painting. You could still appreciate the artwork, but then you pray for the artist. Is that about the way that works?
That's exactly right. So take Goya, for example. I mean, he was a Spaniard. He was anti-Enlightenment, and he was painting the dark side of human nature. And Christians would say he's right about that. But then Christians would also say, but wait a minute, there's hope. And he didn't have much hope. So Goya would have to be celebrated for his realism, but then you'd have to leave him aside when it comes to giving any positive message. And Schaeffer would have very much agreed with that. He would have, you can't pray for him anymore, he's gone, but you could say that he had lots to teach us, but at the same time we have to be wary of the overall worldview, which was fairly negative.
That's a duality, I guess, that a lot of Christians have to face in any age, but it seems in the last 100 years or so, it seems, or probably farther back, you can go to the Puritans. You can look at something that you can appreciate the art, and it does teach us something. But some Christians, as you discussed, we can appreciate it, learn from it, but then we pull in our culture or our worldview from the Bible to make sure that we're in the right spot. Other Christians are more of the mindset of, well, burn it. How do people deal with that, dichotomy?
Yeah, well, I believe that there's a lack of love for God's creation that's behind the burn it mentality. In other words, if you just say the world is going to be judged and there's no point in investing in it, you're actually going against much of the gospel, which tells us to love people and to do our part in redeeming that which is fallen. So there are movements today which make it very attractive to just withdraw, and because it looks like things are going so wrong. But I would answer that by saying we can't be of the world, but we are nevertheless in the world, and we're salt and light, trying to bring a ray of sunshine and a taste that is positive. So yeah, it's a difficult position because we don't want to accommodate, we don't want to be seduced, we don't want to conform. At the same time, we do want to transform and bring to bear kingdom principles to help our fellow human beings to come to justice and flourishing and the opportunity to hear the gospel.
Perfect. Those are some beautiful thoughts, and I think they're spot on. Thank you for sharing those with the reader, and thank you once again for writing such a wonderful book, Created and Creating. And thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
You're very, very welcome.